Good afternoon, Guardians and members of the Space Force Association. I am Damon Feltman. I am the chapter president for Space Force Association in Huntsville, Alabama, the Rocket City. We are broadcasting today from the campus of University of Alabama in Huntsville, and I'm joined today by Space Force Brigadier General Nick Hague, also NASA astronaut Nick Hague. And thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah. So just want to go through a few things that might be of interest to Guardians, because we don't have a lot of astronauts who are also Guardians, and so we'll talk about your unique position inside of NASA, as well as your unique activities inside of the Space Force, and help Guardians understand what we're doing these days. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll get going with the first question. A lot of Guardians start their career, start their lives with an ambition for what you do right now, which is becoming an astronaut. Speaking for myself, as a young kid, I had a very broad ambition for space that led me into Air Force Space Command when that was still around. So talk to me about that for just a second. What was your childhood like? Was being an astronaut something that you wanted from a very young age, or is it something that you kind of grew into as you went through high school, or as you went through the Air Force Academy? How did you get this ambition?
Yeah, in my mind, I separate a little bit. There's the childhood dream, and then there's the professional ambition. Yeah. The childhood dream was always there. That was, looking up at the night sky when I was really little, right, looking at all the stars, and just this urge to explore, to go discover things. Loved science fiction movies and TV shows, and I just gobbled that stuff up. But it was after getting into the Air Force Academy, getting involved with research in the Air Force Research Lab, and then going and getting involved with flight test, working in these small teams, doing really complicated technical things, trying to make equipment and crews do things that have never been done before. I started to really see the parallels of, hey, that thing I was dreaming about as a little kid. Professionally, that's something I've figured out that I actually really enjoy, and that's when it became a professional ambition. So when I was going through test pilot school, I submitted my first application. I got rejected. It was no surprise. Half my classmates submitted applications, and half the instructors that were teaching us how to do the things we were doing submitted their applications. I got rejected there. I tried again 5 years later, got rejected, and finally got accepted 5 years after that. So it took a decade and 3 applications. So there's rejection along the way. Okay. Like most professional ambitions, big lofty goals, it's not easy.
Sure. Well, thank you for that context. So let's dig a little bit deeper into what you're doing right now and talk to Guardians about the DoD's astronaut program. Since the end of the shuttle program, there's not an established or as an established need for DoD astronauts. We're not owning space missions the way we used to in the shuttle program. So why does NASA still send military members to become NASA astronauts? And what is DoD's contribution to NASA's astronaut corps, and what do you bring back to the service when your tour is done?
Yeah. So NASA selects its astronauts. We're actually just in the process of finishing up the selection of the newest class of astronauts. Hopefully in the next month or two, we'll get a big public announcement about who's going to be in that class. I'm excited to figure out who that's going to be. Hopefully there's going to be a Guardian in there, if not an airman. NASA selects. DoD really doesn't weigh in. We help support by an agreement between the Department of Defense and NASA. There's an MOU that says if NASA selects a military member, then we'll assign that military member to work for NASA. And then there's, the complicated reimbursement of salary and all this other stuff. So for the last 12 years, I've been working for NASA as an active duty service member, along with roughly 20% of the astronaut corps is active duty. But there's no quota. There's no billet system down there that says these have to be filled. Military members compete with everybody in the United States that meets those qualifications. I think in this last class we had almost 10,000 people apply, and you're looking at maybe between 10 and 15 people getting selected. Yeah. And the application you just submitted on USA Jobs, so it's a government job. But we always end up with military members being selected, and I think that goes to the skills that the military members bring to the table? What do they contribute to the team? And obviously there's the technical stuff, but the military invests a lot in helping develop soft skills as well. Leadership, followership, how to take care of a team, how to be an amazing teammate, how to be proactive and understand those organizational dynamics. And that's a little bit of the special sauce that I think makes military members attractive in that selection process.
Okay. So when you're flying, people, some of our audience, I guess, is the way that I want to say it. Some of the folks in our audience might not realize that a DoD organization, U.S. Space Command, has been assigned the mission of human spaceflight support to NASA. So there's a cadre of folks at U.S. Space Command who are supporting NASA and taking care of the astronauts. It's easy for us to kind of conceptualize, well, yeah, I can see the Navy supporting. We also, video of the early Apollo days and the early space programs of picking up astronauts at sea. The Air Force has rescue forces as well. But let's dial this into Space Force support to human spaceflight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what are Guardians doing that support your missions and NASA's missions for human spaceflight?
There's a lot of different ways. A couple examples. A few weeks ago, I was out at Vandenberg and visited the 18th Space Defense Squadron and got to go to the console where whenever there's a potential conjunction with the International Space Station, they clear it to make sure that it's not going to be a problem. Or they're calling Houston and saying, hey, this is something you need to potentially move for. And that happens routinely, the notifications, and we're watching stuff closely. And it happens routinely that we actually maneuver the space station out of the way of potential, collisions in space. And so those Guardians on console are keeping, while I was up there for 6 months, me safe. Yeah. They're keeping my friends that are up there right now safe and protecting them. That's one example that's really important. Yeah. If you look at GPS, everybody understands GPS. Space Force provides GPS. There's Guardians that are making that happen. You might not understand that the space station is big enough. It's a football field sized object up there. Yeah. We've got GPS antennas far enough apart that we can determine our attitude with the GPS signal, as well as use that to understand where we're at and come up with our state vector. And so it's, that's a mission that we need. And then there's the other intangible missions where there's like this overlap or this touch point with the civil space mission. But it all boils down to the stability of the domain allows NASA to do its civil space mission of exploration. And without that stability in space, we can't do all of the big lofty things we're planning on doing.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. As a former GPS person myself, it's great to hear how that mission is contributing. Of course, that's not to diminish any other Guardians mission contribution like you just said, but it's one of those things that you don't really think about at the time. So I'm glad that you're able to kind of give us a few touch points as to how the things that Guardians are doing every day on console or elsewhere in the service are supporting you guys.
Supporting us and it's not just us. I see when you see like the catalog, the visual catalog of the 50,000 things that we're tracking up there and the 10,000 satellites, I wish they'd put little pictures on the ones that have people on them because, it used to be there was only like one object up there that had people on it. And now we're starting to see other objects. Right. And so this is making the domain more complicated. It's challenging. And that's why the Space Force missions are so important.
Yeah. So a moment ago, you alluded to how your road into the astronaut program, and that it took 10 years and several applications. Mm-hmm. So I want to kind of step back just a little bit and re-enter that process. Comment on the role that mentors and teammates played on your career. So you made it to the Air Force Academy, a very high achievement. You were selected for advanced education at MIT, another high achievement. You alluded to the test pilot school, and then eventually the astronaut program. So all of these are highly competitive for entry, let alone highly competitive for success. And I assume that your network of peers and mentors really shaped your progress through each of these, in helping you amplify your strengths and also kind of politely pointing out places where you need to kind of pick up the game a little bit. Yeah. So describe the types of mentors you had. How did you go about building your peer and mentor network? And what advice would you give to the Guardians who, they might not want to be astronauts, but they have certain professional and personal ambitions, how they can look around them and build their peer and mentor network?
When I think back to all the different achievements that you talk about, in my mind, it's very clear that I didn't accomplish any of it on my own. There was help and guidance and support along the way for all of it, and it comes in many different flavors. It's a supervisor that is taking the time to get to know you and understand. Okay, these are your dreams, these are your goals, these are the things you want to accomplish, and figuring out how to facilitate that. It's your coworkers caring about you as an individual. It might be your subordinates. Leading from below. And so there's examples of that throughout my career. So my advice to Guardians is that you're not going to accomplish great things on your own. If you want to make some of these really challenging things a reality, you're going to need to be able to ask for help. You're going to need to be able to ask for constructive criticism and be honest with yourself about the things that you're strong at and the things that you're weak at, and then try to work on those. You don't have to have a mentor that wants to do the exact same things that you want to do, because a lot of the advice and a lot of the guidance and nudging has very little to do with that ultimate end goal objective, and it has to do more with those things I was talking about earlier, those soft skills and just how to be a better teammate. Those are the things that I think ultimately lead to success.
Great input. So recently, I watched a recent talk that you gave, and you spoke about how astronauts are assigned to crews about 2 years in advance, and then go through an extensive training regimen to build individual competencies and get a high-performing crew put together, a lot of crew dynamics, working on the soft skills, working on the team roles, et cetera. Guardians don't have 2 years to build for a mission. That now we go through an extensive training program, but you get on your crew and you go through your training regimen, and then you're just off to the races. You're expected to perform at a high level every day. So what parallels in training and crew management do you see between what NASA tries to accomplish in the Space Force? What are the best practices that each could learn from each other? We take an 18-year-old fresh out of high school, and a year and a half later, they're on the floor running GPS. That's not something that NASA does. You're highly, highly trained, and just the opposite. This NASA takes experts like you and even puts more polish onto them and turns you loose on the space station. So what are the best practices that the two organizations share with one another?
Ultimately, I think it boils down to two things. One is culture, and the other is standards. I think those are the common things. So we get assigned 2 years in advance. I think my most current mission is a great example of how, even though you might have been assigned and training for 2 years in advance, our crews are dynamic. They change. I had a mission change for my crew weeks before launch. I ended up having a completely different crew complement on board and working with people that I had no training with at all while I was on the space station. But the thing that makes that successful is training to standards, and that we all have a culture of shared values. And so when you think about NASA values, they're not much different. They might use different words, but ultimately it boils down to the same core values that the Space Force has. And that character, commitment, connection, and courage embodies so much. And if you have a team that is rapidly put together, and you have that common foundation of, I know where these people are coming from a core value perspective, and I know that even though we might not have trained together, you were trained to a particular standard. As we come together, it'll be a little rough, but we'll figure it out and we'll be successful. Yeah. NASA does it the exact same way.
Okay. So let's now pivot to another anecdote. I shouldn't say anecdote. I mean, it's a factual thing that happened to you. A lot of people don't realize that your first mission to space did not go so well on the first effort. We tend to focus on your most recent success. The first one was a really nearly tragic event that turned out really well.
Yeah.
So in the crew environment, we all have bad days where things just don't go where system anomalies and frustrations keep going. But it's days like that where your sets and reps get you through. So if you don't mind, explain what happened on your first attempt to space and how much, when the mission went bad, how much of it was you and your crewmate Sergey, I'm sorry, I forget his
Alexei.
Alexei, I apologize. Yeah. You and Alexei were just along for the ride, or you and Alexei were like, no kidding, throwing switches and actively part of the management of the chaos.
Yeah. So my first flight, it was a launch out of the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan on a Soyuz rocket in a Soyuz spacecraft. My Soyuz commander was Alexei Ovchinin, and I was his pilot, essentially. And then the third seat was normally have somebody in it, was empty. We were, for whatever reason, crew complement-wise. So we launch. It's a beautiful fall day and not a cloud in the sky, and the launch is going beautiful. 2 minutes into the launch is when you have the first stage separation, and the 4 external tanks were empty. They start to lose thrust, and they kind of just differential thrust causes them to separate. A sensor in the external tanks senses that relative motion, and then it will release the pressurant gas in each of those tanks and cause it to separate from the vehicle. One of those boosters, external tanks sensors, was bent, and so it didn't send a signal. And the slipstream from going 4,000 miles an hour is pretty strong, and so at about 30 miles up, 4,000 miles an hour, it caused that external tank to impale essentially the core stage. And as it did that, it tipped us. When it tipped us, the escape system triggered because it sensed an out of bounds, out of tolerance angle of attack, and it automatically fired off some solid rocket motors that were inside the fairing that was around us. And then that pulled us to safety, and then we just kept coasting uphill. So everything that I described there happened in about a second. So it was completely automated. Sensations inside the capsule were us being shaken kind of violently side to side as those rocket motors were going off. In kind of G profile, the staging is relatively low because the thrust drops off. So we were down around 1G when those rockets fired. It made it about 2Gs. So you felt a little bit of a kick in the pants, but not much. There's a master caution light and an alarm that's flashing at you and going off. And then there's a little red light that in Russian says rocket emergency. And that's your indication. And so it took a second or two as that's going on to realize, okay, that's what just happened. Now we do train. 95% of what we train for is the things, what to do when things go wrong. You rarely train, hey, this is an easy day, everything works. And so we had trained that scenario and what we need to do to respond to it 8 months before in the simulator. It was one sim. It's a short sim, as you can imagine. It was about 20 minutes long. Our flight time on this was about 20 minutes. And so we had seen it before. And so that sense of, I'm going to step into my procedures. You compartmentalize all the emotion in the moment. It sneaks out here and there. The initial realization I had was, well, if it was going to be a really bad day, it had already happened, at least we got a shot. Yeah. And so then it's get in procedures. And the best way to get back down to the ground safely and back to your families and, save your crewmate is to follow your procedure perfectly. And so you're laser focused there. The things that we need to do are all back up to the automated system responses. Alexei has to establish ballistic reentry mode, and so he's getting his controller out and issuing that command. I'm closing some additional valves because we're still headed uphill. We end up coasting out at about 90, 95 kilometers. So you're exposed to the vacuum of space, so we're closing additional valves to keep all of our air in. The big question mark is just what kind of damage is there been to the outside, and you just don't know. We're in radio communication almost immediately after we come out of the fairing with ground control, telling them what time the failure happens so that they can project where we're going to impact the ground when we land, and then they're launching the search and rescue forces. And then we come back down in kind of a normal configuration. It's a little higher G load because we're coming in a little steeper, but it's the same chutes we would use 6 months later. We're just using them a little earlier. Kind of the big difference is we don't know the local altimeter pressure to be able to dial into the computers so that they can tell us what elevation we're at or what altitude we're at. And so it's my eyeball out the window going, hey, we're at 20,000 feet, we're at 10,000 feet, we're at 1,000 feet, brace for impact. And landing in a Soyuz is kind of like a controlled car wreck. Hit the ground, and then we hung there in the straps kind of hanging from the ceiling. And we knew that the rescue forces were going to be close, and 3 PJs from the Russian search and rescue forces jumped in, and they were there within 10 minutes of us hitting the ground, and they kind of rolled the capsule so that we didn't fall from the ceiling when we undid our straps, and they pulled us out. And then we waited for the rest of the forces to show up. And then that's when all of that emotion, all of that stuff that you bottled up while you were just focused on doing the job, that's when the wave of shock kind of runs over you, and because you can't bury that forever. Yeah. And then the reality of what just happened, you start to try to absorb all that. But that's after everything has stopped moving.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I remember watching that video the day of. Yeah. I was like, oh my goodness. I mean, I just couldn't imagine what it was like. And obviously emotional for you after the fact. In the moment itself, obviously emotional for your family. I think they were there, right?
Yes, and that's super important to bring up, because when you're in it yourself, I'm getting data real time, and I'm acting on that data, and I'm kind of in control of my own fate. They're getting this huge delay. Katie wasn't getting information. It was about 20 minutes in delay. So she knows there's been a catastrophic failure, and she's got to wait like 20 minutes to figure out, well, is he still with us? Yeah. And so watching from the ground, and it doesn't, not just in that situation, but I think families of the astronaut corps are the heroes, because they sit there and they watch their loved ones launch into space on every one of these launches, and they ride that emotional roller coaster, and they're there and have no control over anything. And hey, that's everything I care about, sitting on top of that rocket. I hope it all goes well. Yeah. And it's super stressful. Yeah. Now,
your wife Katie is a retired colonel.
Yeah.
And you have 2 children, right?
2 sons.
Yeah. So joint spouse. So you go through a lot of the same things, even though you're an astronaut and you're assigned to NASA. People think, oh, that's you're assigned to a civilian organization, so you obviously aren't experiencing the same thing that everyday Guardians experience. Yeah. But that's not really true, because you spent a lot of time as a classic active duty member, and your spouse was a military member and in the reserve. And
I think that was one of the things that helped us. Because we got to see each other's perspective. When there was a time where we both deployed at the same time, and I went to Iraq and she went to Afghanistan. We didn't have any kids, and it was simple. Then there was a time where she did a year-long deployment to Baghdad, and I had our oldest, who was 1.5 at the time, and I did the single parent thing for a year. And so getting to see each other's perspective in those different situations definitely helped us, hone our resiliency as a family and understand how to handle these situations. And we leveraged that like crazy on these space missions, because it's 6 months in space. But on that first mission, I spent 15 months out of the first 2 years of training living in Star City, Russia, away from family. And then when you get back, it's really, the mission isn't over when you splash down or touch down. There's the 2 months of rehab and then another few months where you go on the road and so life doesn't calm down. There's about a 3-year window there where life is, you're gone quite a bit and there's a huge strain. And we leverage everything that we learned while serving in the Air Force and Space Force about separation and how to manage that. And kind of the biggest piece of advice I'd give anybody out there trying to manage those situations is you don't have to do it on your own. And we talked about that abort and the stress and everything like that. There's something that NASA does a really great job of is making available the mental health team to support its crews. Whether there's an issue, an abort situation or not, every crew member gets a team assigned to them, and they help us navigate all of those emotions and the ups and downs of not just with your family, but how you're going to work together as a crew. And so we leaned on them. There's people that do this for a living.
Yeah.
Talking to them about what should we be looking for in terms of like signs of stress and things we should watch out for in our kids. They just watched me blow up on a rocket. Maybe they're going to have trouble the next time I go. How do we handle that? It's okay to ask for help. There's people out there that want to do it and that are good at it.
Yeah, that's such a fantastic point. The point about your two sons and the resources that they might need, and it's easy for the military member to compartmentalize, suppress all of the emotion or stress, and not consider the resources that are available to the spouse or to the children that can help with the dynamics of the life members lead. So I really appreciate you kind of highlighting that through the lens of your that in-flight abort.
Yeah. I mean, the member in uniform, the service member, makes a sacrifice. Their spouse, their loved one, makes a willing sacrifice. They know they're along for the ride when they sign up for this. The kids don't have any choice. They're the unwilling participants in all of this, but everybody in that team is affected by it.
Yeah. Okay. So getting close to the end of the questions that I've got for you, and this is about high-performing teams. You've worked with high-performing teams all around the world, whether it's from the other services that were astronauts or from the other space agencies that NASA works with, Japan, Europe, Russia, and so on. And part of what creates a high-performing team is how it implements and makes part of the core fabric of itself, its core values. So is there something unique about the Space Force's core values, character, connection, courage, commitment, that you've been able to take into these environments in the past couple of years?
When I think about high-performing teams, you mentioned all those different facets, and I'm glad you pointed them all out in terms of the different teams that I've been a part of, because the thing I think that is key to making a high-performing team is a recognition of what we share in common, but also because we all really share a lot in common. Whether I'm working in the astronaut corps and I've got civilian and different service members and we're sitting on a team and attacking a problem, or if we're on the space station and I've got an Italian astronaut and a Canadian astronaut and a Russian cosmonaut and we're working together as a team, we have a lot in common. And what makes a high-performing team high-performing is the differences that we bring to the team. The really good teams, not everybody looks the same. Not everybody thinks the same. Not everybody comes from the same place. We bring those differences, and those differences make us stronger. They make us challenge each other. They make us, not take an easy answer or the first answer that comes there, but we have to really kind of get down to it and we find the right answer, the best answer. And so that's a high-performing team. So what do I bring to the high-performing teams? I bring those core values. I bring that flavor of core values. But like I said, we really share a lot in common. And if you use different words, I think you can find courage, you can find character, you can find connection and commitment. You can find those in all the other services. You can find those in the core values of NASA. It's a commitment to each other to live by a particular ideal, and that's what binds us together. And then all those differences just make us really strong.
No, SFA, it actually predates the Space Force by just a few weeks. Bill Wolf, when he had this idea of establishing the Space Force Association, he reached out to me like the day he built the website and hit me up about what do I think and would I be willing to join as one of the advisors, et cetera. And as I mentioned, coming down the hallway, I was still serving at the time. But I tell you, it has been one of the most rewarding volunteer activities I've been doing since I retired. And I get to do things like this, spend some time with Guardians who are still serving and bring their message forward. But particularly in a town like Huntsville, we don't have a lot of Guardians here. We've got a handful that are at Space Development Agency and a handful at Missile Defense Agency. So this is really about helping bring the Space Force into the community so that the city of Huntsville and the surrounding region understands that this service is out here doing great work for the nation.
Yeah, and that mission is so important across the country.
Yeah.
I wish every American could understand and appreciate what the Space Force does as well as you and I do.
Yeah.
And that's our challenge, right? Is to get out there and to be able to communicate just what do Guardians do and why is what they do so important. So thank you for your support in making that happen.
So I'll turn the floor over to you. Do you have any last comments that you would like to offer to the Guardians that will be watching this?
So this is just a really awesome time. We're coming up. We're going to be approaching our 6th birthday here in a couple months, and we're still. There's so much possibility. There's so much excitement. The mission is growing. The importance is being recognized by so many people outside the Space Force in a way that had been internal to the Space Force. So for Guardians, my challenge to them is to take that passion, take that energy, and turn the Space Force into the Space Force it needs to be, the Space Force that our country needs, the Space Force that they know they can make it. And how do you do that? You do that together. And so I'm looking forward to working shoulder to shoulder with every one of them and figuring out how we can get from here to there.
Fantastic. So General Hague, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Yeah.
And Guardians, thank you so much for what you do every day. And thank your families for us as well. So Damon Feltman from the Space Force Association in Huntsville, signing off.